Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ The Planet every Monday at 7:30 p.m. on WBCQ The Planet, broadcast out of beautiful Monticello, Maine, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time, I should say, since it's shortwave. It's heard around the world. Anyway, this show is sponsored by Camp Constitution, and among other things, Camp Constitution has a family camp, which is coming right up in just a few weeks, July 12th to the 19th. And for those of you interested in learning more about it, visit our website, www.campconstitution.net. And we have a guest on the line here, Mr. Chuck Morse. Chuck, are you there?
I am, Hal. Thanks for inviting me on.
Well, I'm glad to have you. Chuck, you and I go back, I guess to 93 and 94, when you were starting out in the talk show world, the radio talk show world. You had a show on, I think it was Tufts University in near Boston, Massachusetts, and you went on to, you graduated from there, and I think you started doing cable TV show, and you still host one all these years later. And one of the people that, when I first met you, I suggested a number of people that you should have on your show, and one of them is a man who became a dear friend. Not was my dear friend, but a dear friend of yours, Sam Blumenfeld. And we lost Sam just a few weeks ago. We've had Sam had been a guest on this show a number of times. He's been an instructor at Camp Constitution. He really loved coming up to the camp and talking to the young people and meeting new people and visiting with old friends. And I know, Chuck, he was almost a regular guest with you, almost a co-host sometimes.
Sam and I did thousands of radio broadcasts. I mean, he was and remains a towering figure in my life. I still can't believe he's gone. He was the man was a giant of a man. He is one of those people that will never be celebrated by the big Eastern Seaboard liberal elites. But he was someone who, in his own way, made a major impact on the world and continues to do so. I believe Sam, I would describe him as the founding father of the modern homeschooling movement, which in itself is one of the most optimistic movements we've seen come out of the firmament in the past several decades. Finally, parents are taking control of their children's education. They're circumventing the establishment education, which is deliberately scrambling people's brains and morality. And they are producing children that are excellent, and even to the degree that a lot of liberals are now getting into it. Everyone wants their children educated properly. And it's something that the establishment has not been able to control. It's something that continues to grow. Sam has written almost a shelf of books on education. These books are unique. He uncovered what can only be described as a conspiracy in his research of John Dewey, the so-called founder of progressive education, and how Dewey deliberately and consciously set about to dumb down this country through a mis-teaching of reading. It's an incredible story. It's something that it should be an eye-opener for anyone who is exposed to it.
Well, you know what's interesting, Chuck? This Common Core is a newest scheme, and actually it's nothing really brand new. Sam had been talking about this for years, and the good thing about Common Core is not that it's good, but it's helping parents. Maybe many more parents have come to realize how bad this is and are looking at the bigger picture. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times when we'll give presentations, whether it be Sam, had done presentations on the topic, a lot of the folks who are children that are in public schools get offended. There's a saying, you mean this, you're questioning my judgment? You don't think I know what's happening in the public schools? And the answer is, for the most part, no. You don't know. And if you believe in moral values and absolutes and you have some type of Judeo-Christian background, you would be repugnant at what's happening. And the notion that you can somehow unlearn, I remember hearing a fellow call on one of these talk shows one day, and he said, he thinks it's funny, it's cute. My son comes home and tells me I'm a fascist because I don't recycle. I got to deprogram him. And how you deprogram somebody who's getting this stuff 6 to 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, 9 to 10 months out of the year, you may have quality time with your son for how long? 15 minutes? When he's not on his cell phone watching TV, and you're going to have influence on him? It's interesting too. Sam, I would totally agree that he was a pioneer in the modern homeschool movement, even though a lot of folks, when you bring up his name, who's that? Although he is still very well known and has been well known, there's a whole new crop of people that may not know Sam or even know the name, but the influence, because Sam has influenced so many people. And people who listen to you, Chuck, will say, "Well, I was motivated by Chuck Morse. I met Chuck. I heard him on the radio. He's the one that inspired me." Yeah, but who inspired Chuck? And I know that I've influenced some people in the homeschool communities, and we homeschool our children, and we have tables. Camp Constitution sets up tables at homeschool conventions, and we reach out to people, and we've had Sam's books. So a lot of people are influenced. So Sam has several, I guess, 2 generations. I won't use the word disciple. I kind of kid people. I say I'm a branch Blumenthology, But really, it's interesting too. When we first started homeschooling, sometimes you always, are we doing the right thing? Maybe we should look at, and then I would play a speech. I get all my cassette. Sam he's given hundreds, if not thousands, of presentations in his long and productive life, in all 50 states, and in Australia, in New Zealand, and I think he even went to China. Actually, he did go to China a few years ago, and he was trying to have these Chinese people, if you're going to learn English, learn how to do it phonetically, so you can master the language. So Sam has influenced so many people, and you see a lot of people. When I first started back in I met Sam in 88, 89, and worked with him from the early 90s up until he passed away very recently. I would take him to speaking engagements, radio shows, and I interviewed him at the cable TV show that I used to do. I have him come to our camp on a pretty regular basis. And there are a lot of people who would say, well, Sam's a great guy, but he's a little too radical. The problem was a lot of these people were afraid to actually, they knew what he said was true. They just didn't want to, they just were afraid to deal with it. And that's one thing that Sam would be noted for, that he was one of, if not the first person, and you said earlier, conspiracy. People, I don't know why, they seem to be afraid of that word. It's a good word. It's an English language,
Well, I mean, it's conspiracies happen all the time. I mean, political and criminal conspiracies. It's people using methodology to deceive or to defraud people for a lot of reasons, whether it be for money or for some bigger agenda. And in the case of the John Dewey knew that he could not implement socialism in the United States, which he believed in, and he had previously been influenced by Edward Bellamy's Looking Backward, which was basically a fictional book that was hugely popular in the early 1890s, where this guy falls asleep for 100 years, wakes up, and he's discovering this wonderful, glorious, communist America.
That's right. It's an excellent book, and Edward Bellamy was from Chicopee, Massachusetts, and Sam said that this novel was one of the top motivating novels or influential novels of that time. And today, a lot of people have never heard of it. And he's the one that I actually, when he told me about it, I read the book. I says, "Oh my goodness!" And it was Bellamy's cousin who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. And you think, well, he must have been a patriot. And he may have been he was an internationalist. He was a socialist. He was trying to have us pledge blind allegiance to the government. It took, I think it was the American Legion, to add one nation, a republican under God. So they sort of hijack it a little bit to make it more pro-American. So the idea of this nationalism, and Sam would write about Horace Mann. And I think you joked about it. There's a statue of Horace Mann at the State House in Boston wearing a toga. And didn't you say that they should have a statue of you wearing a toga?
Yeah, I mean, that should be Sam Blumenfeld. I mean, Horace Mann was really way back, a so-called progressive educator. He tried to put look-say into the Boston school system in the 1840s.
And he was successful. I think it was introduced for a few years. Yeah. But unlike today, they didn't have big foundations forcing, giving money to schools. Or didn't have the federal government giving money to schools. So what did the teachers do in Boston after a few years? They said, this is a disaster. Let's get rid of this thing.
Exactly. And people have enough sense to do that. But as far as Francis Bellamy goes, this is one of those situations where it sort of backfired on the left. He implemented the Pledge of Allegiance, and the kids stood in class every morning and saluted the flag like the Nazis.
That's right. That's right.
The ancient Romans.
That's right.
The idea was worship of the state. The nationalist clubs that built up, and that the state it came from the Hegelian concept of the state as having a sort of a divine entity, kind of a repackaging of the divine right of kings, and but the national anthem eventually was, as you say, hijacked. It was co-opted by conservatives in a way that, like when Karl Marx coined the phrase capitalism, he meant it derogatorily, but today it's a badge of honor.
That's right.
These are the sorts of things that the left can manufacture these, or attempt to manufacture realities, which is what they do. But the real reality eventually bubbles up to the surface and asserts itself. And I think that was the case with Bellamy. But Dewey really was, Sam wrote extensively on John Dewey, and his influence was profound. I mean, he really he understood that in order to circumvent the development of the American citizen, that he could have to tinker with the children's minds by corrupting their ability to read, and thus create, rather than an independent thinker who could go on and actualize his own life based on his own terms, you would have what Dewey called a fusion, which is what he strove toward. But he also understood that you could not do it openly, because if you did, there would be a revolution, a rebellion, a rejection. So that's where the word conspiracy comes into play. Dewey consciously and deliberately hid the agenda.
And didn't he write this? It was in 1898. He wrote the reading fetish.
Yeah, which he referred to reading as a perversion, and that somehow it had to be overcome. And then in another essay, he wrote about the church and the father-headed state is an institution that should be viewed as an anachronism. He wrote that the Constitution was unsuitable to modern society, as did, by the way, a young professor in 1880 who wrote an essay about the Constitution, who went on to become President Wilson. I mean, this was a part of the progressive idea that somehow the state would become a living entity rather than simply a government as existing under a set of laws that allow individuals to be living entities.
And the government is, in the eyes of the progressives, I hate to use that word progressive, too. It's nothing progressive about socialism and tyranny. But they looked at the state as God walking on earth. And the Humanist Manifesto won, I think it was 1933. John Dewey was one of he lived a long life, too. He died in his 90s. But John Dewey, I believe it was Dewey, who said that the humanist teacher, will use the classroom just like a minister, a preacher will use the pulpit, and to promote humanism. And humanism is a religion. It's the worship, deification of man. And unfortunately, there are so many people who would never call themselves humanists, but thanks to the influence of Horace Mann and John Dewey and many others, are really, in essence, humanists.
Well, he did turn the public education into a pulpit. He took away the ability of young people to learn cognitively so they could think on their own through things like phonics and things like understanding the Constitution and basic modalities of education that would help someone think clearly, critical thinking, declamation, the memorization of things, and he replaced it with behaviorism, with preaching. I mean, the teacher would stand on the soapbox now and preach about things like global warming and social justice, which is a euphemism for communism. Unfortunately, I see that this happening not just in the schools, but in a lot of institutions, including the Catholic Church. Look at the Pope.
That's right. Right.
It's terrible. I mean, he's there. He sounds like one of these socially progressive teachers. They're now coming out. He's coming out with an encyclical about global warming, and he goes to Turkey and he prays in a mosque while Christians are being slaughtered in Syria and Iraq. I mean, it's become, in other words, religion has been replaced in this case by this idea that the ultimate virtue is to tolerate others, including others we may not like. There's no actual belief system there. I mean, this is a whole different subject, Al, but, I've done some writing on this with regard to the influence of Julian Huxley.
By the way, let the listeners, if they want to get a hold of you, and you have a radio show, and you also have a website. I think you've archived almost all of your interviews with Sam Blumenfeld. You were probably, I would say, the last person to interview him on television or on a video showing. So why don't you give that information out? And you've also written a few books too. So please.
Thank you, Hal. I mean, what I would send people to my blog site, which is Chuck Moore Speaks, and on that site you'll see featured a page dedicated to Sam, with links to many of our interviews on the radio. There's probably about 30 interviews that you could listen to. Some of the best radio I've ever done, I ever probably will do. And also I did have the privilege of interviewing Sam on my TV show in the Boston Neighborhood Network just a few weeks before he passed away. And he came in and he was brilliant. You can see that on YouTube, and it's archived also on my blog site, and my books are available at Amazon or Amazon Kindle. Just put my name in the server, Chuck Morse, like Morse code, and you'll see about 15 books come up.
It was amazing, though, seeing Sam his way. I used to visit him a few days before he died, and he was weak, but his mind was clear. There was no senility at all. His mind was. I mean, if you look at a body, you say, well, okay, the guy had a body of a 25-year-old, or well, yeah, his mind was that of a very on all cylinders. His mind was physically fit, to say, even up to the last few days before he passed away. I wanted to get the book that he co-authored, and I was very pleased that I was able to play a role in getting him to meet his co-author of Crimes of the Educators, Alex Newman. Alex had not met Sam prior to, they collaborated on a book published by World Net Daily, Crimes of the Educators, and you can find that on Amazon. It's selling very, very well. And I'm about halfway through it. And there's a lot of information that was not new to me, but there's always new things to learn. But there's two chapters that really struck me. One of them was the creation of a black underclass, and how the scientific racists, it's really hard for people to understand that these so-called progressive educators, most of whom they were racists, and they created the IQ test to prove that certain people were, I say prove in quotation marks, and it came out of Clark University. G. Stanley Hall hired this fellow to come up with this IQ test, and then they even looked at they got 11 blacks and 12 whites and 12 American Indians, and they did a reaction to stimulus, and they said, well, the whites were the slowest, the Indians were the fastest, the blacks were in the middle. Therefore, it demonstrates that blacks and Indians are inferior because whites respond slower. Well, wait a minute. How has that anything to do with intellect? I mean, you have quick reflexes. Isn't that a good thing? Isn't that a good sign? Why would that have anything to do with intelligence? So anybody can hit a baseball at 95 miles an hour to make them dumb? Yeah, right. I don't know. I think you got something going for you. But it shows you it's a farce. And the sad thing is that most people, I'm not suggesting that most white liberal educators are racists, but I remember back in the 90s, I befriended a couple of lovely ladies from Boston, Roxbury, black ladies, and I had them on I think it was a cable TV show in Framingham where you had filled in for me, and you were getting your first taste of cable TV. And this lady was probably about my age, Lydia, and she said that she wanted to be a nurse. And she goes to the white guidance counselor. Oh, wow, that's a wonderful thing, but you probably don't have the ability. A hairdresser is what you should be. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a hairdresser. My sister-in-law is a hairdresser. They do pretty well for themselves. But if this woman wanted to be a nurse, and she became a nurse, and I said, I think the inner city schools were the laboratories for the rest of the country. The stuff they were doing they did, in the mid-'80s to all the schools they were doing in the black communities in the 70s. But there's a chapter all about this, the blacks underclass, and you see because most of them, and it was interesting too that after 1880 there was a black illiteracy rate was about 57%, and then 20 years later it's down to 20, and then in the 1920s was sort of the Renaissance in Harlem when you had black businessmen and you had business owners and you had a literacy rate, and blacks were making great improvements. And then what happened? The look-say. And the look-say method crippled
Well, I
them.
mean, it was a lot of things. I think it was none other than Lyndon Johnson's Assistant Secretary of Labor, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who warned about what the so-called Great Society was going to do to black people. And at that time, the black family was intact. There was about 80%. Black people were religious. They were coming up in the ranks. They were entering into the middle class in spite of Jim Crow.
That's right.
And yet what the big welfare state did was today you've got black illiteracy rates. I mean, literacy rates, I should say, is something like 30 to 40%. Broken homes marriages are down about the same number. Crime is up. And so, yeah, this system is racist. I wouldn't say they are not racist. I'd say they are racist.
Yes.
They have a paternalistic, patronizing, white man's burden attitude toward black people who they treat like children.
We know what's best for them, they say. We know what's best for you.
Right.
And not that I admire Malcolm X, but I read his autobiography, and he said that the white liberal spells Negro, K-N-E-E-G-R-O-W, meaning that they're condescending, the white liberals condescending to the black. You know, we know you must do what we tell you.
They treat them like children. I know people like that in my own family. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And then certainly people like John Dewey and them and the whole liberal establishment, they were eugenists. They did believe that because they adhered, of course, to the practical aspects of Darwinism, they did believe that man is not created equal, but that we're at different levels of the chain in terms of our evolution based on breeding. That's Darwin's theory, and that basically, black people were less well bred. They were inferior because of their biological breeding levels, and Darwin was very explicit about this.
And Darwin's pit bull was it Thomas Huxley, known as
T.H. Huxley,
who was a flaming racist, and of course he was the father of Aldous Huxley, right? And
that's
also,
right. And Julian Huxley, the founder of UNESCO, who a few years after World War II and the Holocaust, he wrote a manual for UNESCO where he talked about bringing eugenics back at the right time. So, this is, and I think they've done that with abortion. They've done it with population control, where UNESCO and Planned Parenthood, International Planned Parenthood, has poured billions of taxpayer dollars into forced abortions in China and in other countries.
That's right. That's right.
Sterilization. They've sterilized tens of thousands of women without them even knowing it.
That's right, and, especially in India.
Yeah, I mean, this is liberalism. I mean, this is broad-minded thinking. And
now there was another chapter in the book, and it was the Miller test. I don't know if you've got a chance to read that or not. Well, Sam, as you know, had bequeathed his library to me and his papers, and that to me is an awesome responsibility. And of course, I want you to be a part of any. And we've already uploaded some of his letters. In fact, Rudolph Fleisch. I want to talk about Rudolph Fleisch for a few seconds.
Big influence system. Yep.
It's interesting that one person influences another. When Sam was working for Grosset and Dunlop, and I just found a letter. Well, he never told me this. Maybe he told you that he got fired because he had published a book, a paperback, when the boss was gone. He authorized the printing of a book. I think it was a Max Eastman going after socialism, and I said that's why he was let go. But he was asked by a friend of his, Watson Washburn, a New York attorney who passed away in the early 70s. He asked him if he'd be part of this Reading Reform Foundation, and Sam said, "Well, why would you need this?" And he said, "Children aren't learning how to read anymore." He says, "What are you talking about? Reading is one of the most easiest things to learn. I mean, it's just like walking and talking. It's not that difficult a thing to do." And he said, "No, you need to read Rudolph Fleisch's book, Why Johnny Can't Read," which was published in 1955. So Sam read it, and that put Sam on a lifelong journey to get phonics, to promote phonics. And of all the books he wrote, I think the most influential, they're all great, all the books he did, even the Shakespeare-Marlowe controversy is a great book to read. But it's his Alpha-POhonics. If he's going to have a legacy, it's going to be multi-generational, and with the people like you and I making sure that his legacy lives on. The Alpha-POhonics, how to teach people, and he's taught adults. He's taught people with Down syndrome. He's taught children, it's a very simple step, I think 100 steps to become very highly literate. And he said you don't need puppets popping out of trash cans or pictures to teach you how to read. And the Alpha-POhonics book. So I actually have some correspondence he had with Rudolf Fleisch, and I learned that Fleisch was a socialist. He was from Vienna, Austria, came over here before the Nazis took over. And but so he was a very honest, noble guy. I don't think he was trying to destroy people's minds. Hey, you embrace socialism, that's your business, But he realized how detrimental phonics, Looks-Say method was, and he spent a lot of time trying to get people to understand. So I want to mention the Miller test. There's a chapter in the book, and I have a box. One of the boxes was all this. I didn't know anything about this Miller test, and I read the chapter. I said, oh, well, there was a man that he heard Sam speak somewhere. I think he was from North Carolina, and he ended up. He believed that he was dyslexic from the beginning. It was almost a hereditary ailment. And then he discovered that he was dyslexic not because of genetic problems, which is the phony the medical world, but the little books that his mother would read to him when he was a baby, a toddler, gave him that look-say reflex, and it really helped Sam because Sam couldn't answer the question either. And then he started doing tests. He came up with a Miller test, and he was going into public and private schools, and he learned that at the fourth grade, you kind of peak out with the look-say because he was testing the sixth graders who had been tested 2 years earlier, and they were doing poor. So they could only memorize so many words, and then you sort of go down. So I highly recommend this book, Crimes of the Educators, Sam Blumenfeld and Alex Newman. And I'm glad.
Book. It kind of wraps up and encapsulates all of the material Sam's been working on his entire life, and then it adds a lot more. And it's very, very well done. I recommend it also.
We only have a couple of minutes left, 30 seconds ago. We got 3 minutes left. So let's, Chuck, why don't you talk a little bit about your radio show? How can people hear, and what do you talk about on your radio show besides education? I'm sure there's a wide range of topics that you're involved.
Well, I look at the news of the day. I interview authors. I do philosophy. As I mentioned, I've got a long correspondence with Sam. Sam was with me on every program I did, and I've probably been on about, well over a dozen radio stations in Greater Boston. Every time I start getting a little traction, they get rid of me, And so I jump on to the next one. And a lot of those, fortunately, are archived, and they're available on Chuck Moore Speaks. It's some of the most interesting, if I don't mind saying, some of the most interesting radio ever done. Sam and I had a tremendous on-air chemistry. We had a great time. It was fun. It was informative. Sam would knock the ball out of the park every time with fantastic insights, but he would do it like a kindly Jewish uncle.
Yeah, that's right. Yes,
he didn't hit you over the head with it. It was it was more effective that way, and that he just he came across in a nice, gentle, kindly way, but he would get right to it. The man knew how to skin something down to its most essential basics and present it just right there in the middle of things. You always learn something. I always walk away with something when I talk to Sam, and I only can hope to continue, and I know you do also, Hal, to continue that legacy and to continue to try to knock the ball out now that Sam, unfortunately, has passed away. That we just have to, the best way to hold on to his memory is to continue to work, continue what he's done.
We're out of time, so Chuck, thank you. We'll have you on again. It was great, and this show is sponsored by Camp Constitution, campconstitution.net, and make sure you also, by the way, we started archiving. If you go to our website, you'll see a link to Scribd, and we have a page for Sam Blumenfeld. We're going to be adding to that, so we'll have all these great, and Chuck, anything I have is yours, if you know what I mean. You're welcome to it, so please. Okay, God bless, and we'll see you down the road.
Same to you. Okay.